All right, welcome. It's shortly after noon, so we'll get rolling. Welcome to everybody. I'm really excited to have a great guest here as well today. Um, let's get started. In the chat, it's really lovely to sit here. We sort of get ready 10 minutes early and watch people come and introduce themselves and share what's making them happy from around the country. Actually, one of the things that's making me happiest this weekend is I just found out that one of my closest friends is not only having a child, he's having twin boys, and I will also be the godfather. So we spent about a couple hours today trading favorite boys' names. So if anybody has a great idea on what to name a child who is going to be half Japanese Hawaiian and half white Texas, German Irish sort of American mix, send me ideas because I am desperate for ideas. Right now, we're thinking things like Keanu, which is a Hawaiian word for breeze, and Ren, which is Japanese for love. But it basically has to be pronounceable by his extended family and sort of cool and interesting as well. So any ideas, let me know. I already suggested Patrick, and I was already rejected. We are going to talk about what to know about nonprofit fundraising during an election year. Those of you that thought 2020 couldn't get any crazier are, just wait until the next part of the year. Quick note before we get started, thanks to my colleague Simone, who's been doing great work with the CFRE team. This event is CFRE approved. We've also gone back and made sure that the first 8 webinars, which are available for recordings, are approved as well for 1 credit hour each. And so we know that a lot of people are trying to catch up on professional development, and we're almost at 2/3 of your 3-year requirement for 15 credit hours. So we'll sort of keep on that going forward, and hopefully this is as helpful to you as possible there. If you want to get certified for it, we just have to keep our own records per the CFRE rules. And so just fill out the survey, and there's a little checkbox that says, yes, make sure to note that I'm here. Survey comes at the end, by the way. So we'll do today's agenda, intros. We'll do some background on what happens to nonprofit fundraising in past election years. And then we have one of my favorite people, Matt Compton, joining us. And I'll tell you all sorts of great things about Matt before he joins. Then we'll talk about some strategies for breaking through the noise. We'll share some new ideas that we got from around the nonprofit community. And then we'll just talk through next steps in Q&A. And Matt's going to stick around for Q&A, which is really generous of him as well. Okay, so there's actually a lot of new folks on the session this week. And so happy to be meeting you. My name is Patrick Schmitt. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO along with my brilliant, wonderful co-founder, Jenny. We're also really lucky to be part of a big team, traditionally based in New York City, now sort of scattered to the winds. And we work with a couple hundred nonprofit partners to help them make bequests and QCDs and stock giving and some of these complicated things a little bit more digital, a little bit easier, and it's been really great. And we're really excited to welcome 20 new nonprofits this week. So if those of you that are new to FreeWill, we're just super excited to help and see what we can do together. So we asked you how your week is going, and there's some interesting trends this week. So we've been following how folks are feeling week over week, and this yellow line, which is anxious, sort of trended down for a long time. And actually, over the last 2 weeks, it started to come back up, which is an interesting dynamic here. But I think people sort of felt like, oh my God, what's happening? Okay, we can get through this. And now we're sort of in the how long is this going to last and when are we going to get out of it period. So I can see why that's happening. And I think some folks on our team are feeling anxious as well. You actually see sort of a sharp dip in eagerness or feeling energized. And I think that the sort of shift from being, okay, we're ready to take on a challenge to, okay, now we're going to move to a little bit of the grind is happening. So it's really important that I think we can sort of support each other and support our teams and our community at this time as well. So maybe keep an extra eye out for yourself and for everybody else this week. Similarly, in terms of how people are feeling, one big sort of tick up this week in terms of what folks are worried about is around hitting goals. And so we'll share some more strategies there a little bit. Generally, people are less worried week over week. Let's talk about nonprofit fundraising in election years and sort of share what happened in the past. So when we asked folks whether the upcoming election is changing your fundraising strategy, most people said no, about 46%. Another half said we don't know yet. That's why we're here. And then 6% said yes. So we'll dig into more of moving some of those I don't knows into how you might want to think about tweaking your fundraising strategy in a moment. We also asked people whether or not, or how they thought fundraising would be affected by the election. So you have a pretty small percentage that says will increase, about 14% says decrease, 25% said not at all, and then most people, again, don't know yet. And so we'll dig into more of what we're likely to see there. So quick, before we get in, it's the first time we're trying a poll, I'm going to launch it. How do you think nonprofit giving was affected in 2012 and 2016? And we're going to use as a baseline 2011 and 2015 to see how that shared. So I'm going to launch the poll, and we'll give folks, I don't know, 20 seconds to think about it and vote, and then share the answers. All right. About 78% of you have voted, so we'll give you another 3 seconds or so. And let's see if we can share the results. So what you see here is general guess is slight increase, almost tied with slight decrease at about 39%. Significant decrease, small, and significant increase, somewhat there. So let's dive in and figure out what the actual answer is. But it seems like people are thinking, okay, it's roughly going to be the same. Good point. Jim notes that the photos are from 2008 and 2012, which is correct. John McCain and Barack Obama was a 2008 election, and Mitt Romney was in 2012. So here's what happens in 2011, which is really interesting. So you might think we're getting crowded out by our donors are giving to candidates instead of us. And actually that ends up not being true. What you saw from a study Blackbaud did, and hats off to them for this research, is that you saw a slight uptick in giving from people who were also giving politically, and then a 2% downtick from people who decided to just sort of opt out of the process when the noise got to be too much. And this is really interesting because it's counterintuitive. You might think the people that are going to give to politicians are going to take away from charitable giving, and the people who don't care are going to continue their giving. But a slight shift to here is that people get in the habit of giving during election years because they're bombarded with this, and actually it can increase if you find those same folks. So that's really, really key and interesting. And when we break down a little bit, this is what we're seeing. Let me explain this chart for a little bit. So what we're looking at is by income levels, how are people that are political donors and non-political donors affected? And so what you see at the very lowest level is people who are political donors become more engaged across the board, and you actually see a 5% increase in their giving charitably, whereas the folks that are not giving politically drop. And same thing as you get higher political donors at the top end, 150K, have a 1% increase and then a 2% decrease. So you actually want to see the people that are more engaged as opposed to the folks that are bouncing out. And then separately, you can look at, okay, households that are male, female, that are female only, that are male only. This study didn't include households that have 2 husbands or 2 wives. Not sure why that happened. But you can see that the male-only households are actually a dramatically larger percentage of the political giving, but the female-only households are leading in charitable giving. And you can see what that shift looks like as well. So some really interesting data here to understand as well. And then let's look at 2016, because there's some really interesting data coming out of this. Not simply before the election, but also after. So overall giving went up by 2.6% from 2015 to 2016. But giving shifted. And what you saw is the ACLU, for instance, after the Trump election, got 300,000 new members, which is an extraordinary jump for them. Something like the Anti-Defamation League, in I think the weeks following the election, saw a 50 times increase compared to the same period over the year before. There was obviously a large spike in giving to women's rights groups and other organizations like that. And this actually tends to be true not just in the Trump year, but across the board. And this is really interesting. And if you have at all sort of a political bent to your organization, you'll definitely want to pay attention here. And if you don't, it's still fascinating. I found it really, really interesting. So there's an increase in contributions to organizations who are aligned with the losing party in a election year. So if you are a more liberal group and a Republican wins, you'll see an increase in giving. If you're a Republican or a more conservative group, it doesn't have to be actually political, and a Democrat wins, you'll see an increase in giving there. There's a slight decrease in giving aligned with the winning party. So this is really interesting. If you are a politically minded and a politically minded organization, and you do your jobs, you're likely to see giving the following year. And if you don't do your jobs, you're going to see more giving, which is a really interesting paradox here. The impact is even larger when the result is unexpected. So in a world where Barack Obama is cruising to re-election and then it happens, you don't have that same massive jump. But in the 2016 world, where it was a surprise for many people who were watching closely, you saw this massive shift. It was actually a 168% increase in 2016. This also means that after the election, and this is relatively slight, but you'll see a slight decrease to non-aligned or apolitical organizations, which represents the majority of folks here, because the surge in energy post-election will go mostly to the folks in the losing party. And so some of that may get shifted away from things like hospitals or colleges. But that should be a relatively slight thing and not to worry about too much, but it is really interesting. So let's talk about what we should expect in 2020 itself. And we're really excited, or at least I'm excited, and you should be excited, to have Matt Compton here. So this is Matt with his beautiful son, Teddy. Matt is a very, very proud graduate of the University of North Carolina. Go Tar Heels. Matt and I worked together for President Obama at the DNC. Matt's done a ton of ghostwriting for Barack. He worked at the White House as one of the sort of huge leaders in new media and strategy at the White House, which is really exciting. Was on the Hillary campaign and is now the director of advocacy and engagement at Blue State Digital. So when I was thinking about who can we share with this community who would know everything about political fundraising and have deep insights into the nonprofit world, I'm really excited to have Matt here. He's one of the smartest, kindest, most thoughtful people I know. So I'm really excited. I'm going to pause sharing my screen and so we can get Matt on video. Let's see if this works. Great. And Matt, do you have a chance to?
Hello.
Great. Do you have a chance to turn your video on?
It's telling me that it's not been unmuted by the host yet, but
let's make you a co-host and see if that does anything. You're all figuring this out.
There we go.
Excellent. There you are. Amazing. Matt, we're so glad to have you. And it's really nice to see you. Before we get started on anything else, what is bringing you joy this week or today?
Well, on Friday, Jason Isabel, who's this artist who I absolutely adore, released a new album called Reunions. And since then, I've probably listened to it 30 times. But this morning in particular, I listened to it all the way through while sitting on the floor with my 3-year-old building a train set. So that was pretty good stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And speaking of art, one of the things I've always admired about you is Matt reads more than anybody I've ever met. I think, a typical year we'll see you read 80 books, up to close to 100, although that, some of those might be, Goodnight Moon right now. But what's a book that you would recommend to all of us who are listening and trying to make the best of this? Or just find some joy?
When you mentioned this might be a question, I started thinking about it. And the one that immediately popped in mind was this incredible single volume history of the United States by Joe Lepore called These Truths. And it's this really fascinating attempt to do what, a lot of historians have done in the past, but to bring that story to life by introducing perspectives and viewpoints from a lot of people who don't typically get represented in big, traditional stodgy American histories. So lots of quotes from marginalized communities, lots of quotes from and diaries and letters and memoirs from former slaves and from women who are played key roles in conflict and revolution. And it was incredible. But if a 600 page or whatever history of the United States is not what you are happy with right now, or doesn't feel right now, I thought about what is the other sort of fascination making me happy in this moment, and that is reading mystery novels.
Mm-hmm.
There's just something about right now where it's really satisfying, deeply satisfying, to have a problem with a solution that you figure out in the span of a couple hundred pages. And so if I'm going to recommend one, it's going to be Bruno, Chief of Police by Martin Walker. It is about a police chief in a small rural town in France who solves mysteries and makes plenty of time for lunch. It's just like everything that I want right now. And the new book in that series comes out next week, so I'm particularly excited about it.
That's awesome. So the first book is These Truths, as in we hold these truths to be self-evident.
That's right. Simone just shared it in the chat.
Great. And what's the title of the second book?
It's called Bruno, Chief of Police by Martin Walker.
Okay, awesome. All right,
yeah.
Let's go into political fundraising. I'm so excited to get my hands probably on the mystery first, and then when I have more time on the second one. Look, this is obviously going to be a wild election, and we say every 4 years it's the most important election of our lives, and it's probably going to be said a lot this year as well. And actually, a lot of people on this call are worried that their organizations get drowned out by the election and all the attention. But when we say it's going to be wild, what month does it get really wild in, right? When does that actually sort of cacophony start?
Yep. So political fundraising happens on a cycle, and federal campaign committees are required to submit reports to the FEC at the end of every month, and then a more exhaustive report at the end of every quarter. Mm-hmm. And so I think you should prepare for lots of little beats. The last 3 days of May is going to be busy, but because June is an end of quarter, the last week or 10 days is going to be, we'll see campaigns of all kinds up their volume and really push goals in front of their supporters and make a case. If you think about the whole cycle, when the trend up is going to start to happen, the Olympics aren't happening this year. So, and both parties are trying to think through how to make their case in front of voters as cleanly as possible. So the Democrats moved their convention into August, which means both conventions are going to happen back to back now. And I think that will really kick off the campaign season and the sort of fundraising cycle in earnest. Until the final week of the campaign for us in 2016, that week of the Democratic Convention was one of our single best fundraising weeks, and an opportunity for us to, put asks in front of supporters as much as possible. So what you're going to see is a big August with end of quarter. With the conventions, and then September is a new end of quarter. So you'll see another spike then that will persist all the way through October, because the other thing that's true for this election is that the first Tuesday in November is on the 3rd. And so we don't get a full week in the month to really boost our fundraising or do anything else. So I think campaigns are going to try to get as much from the month of October as they possibly can, and make a strong a case. So I think those last 3 months before Election Day are going to be intense and busy, and they're going to suck up a lot of oxygen.
One insight that I took away from this is really interesting, and one that I think I used to know but I forgot, is this end of quarter idea. Because most of our nonprofit partners and other folks, they internally care about it, but it's never a message that the University of Arkansas has to hit its June 30th deadline. It just doesn't happen the same way, because you've got other reasons to fundraise. And so that's really smart. So then if you're a nonprofit, you can say, great, let's just sort of put an X through 28, 29, 30, 31. And if we can get in on the 26th and 27th, we might have a lot more clean space. Really great insight.
Yep.
And when we talk about intense or things getting intense, what does that look like? Because we talk to partners and said, look, we don't want to badger anybody. We try not to send more than 2 emails a month. How many emails a month is the Biden campaign going to be sending to small, mid-sized, large donors?
Yeah, so it's interesting. At Blue State, we work with a lot of nonprofits that plan very big, intense end-of-year campaigns. And I imagine that's true for some people here today. And when folks from our team join campaigns or start doing political work, one of the things I sit them down and say, like, imagine that final week of end of year, but that's what it's going to feel like at the end of every month. And you should think about that times 2 for the end of every quarter. And, for the month of October in an election year, it's what it's going to feel like almost every day. There were days when we would send 12 different emails to large percentages of our list in 2016. Now, one of the things that's changed a bit since you and I did this work together back in 2010, a full decade ago now, oh my God, is that we've gotten a lot smarter as like a progressive movement and much more sophisticated about how we think about deliverability and how we think about segmenting and prioritizing asks for our most important people. The other thing to say,
I'm going to pause you for 1 second just to
yeah.
explain. So as a quick aside, email deliverability means whether Google and Yahoo and Outlook let your emails through or send them to the spam filter. So that's all gotten much more sophisticated. All right, continue.
The people who actually interact with messages the most, the people who are giving the most signals to campaigns that they are interested, that they are participating, that they are tracking the messages on an ongoing basis, are the folks who will receive, in most cases, the most messages, which may feel like a contradiction or may feel, hard to process, but it is the way that good programs will set up their work. Now, there are obviously exceptions and caveats, and one big important one, especially thinking about donor tiers, is that federal elections have very strict campaign finance limits, and so there are folks who are in those categories who will max out and automatically move into a different email cadence. But the idea that campaigns don't treat their major donors or their sort of mid-tier donors the same way that they treat grassroots donors in terms of online outreach, in terms of sort of the content strategy, I think is a little outdated. I think increasingly what you see is that the best campaigns are thinking through how to reach people as individuals. And, that sometimes means that like the folks who are going to contribute the federal max will do so over email. Sometimes it does require that like conversation directly with the candidate, but that's not true 100%. So it's more about what is right for the particular audience, what is right for the particular supporter, and less about who is ultimately responsible for collecting that donation.
Yeah, what's interesting here is, just on volume for a second, we're getting up to maybe 2-3 emails a day from the campaign towards the end, and it's not just the campaign, right? So the campaign is sending, the Democratic Party is sending, every major Senate candidate, the governor's race, all these, so it's going to be overwhelming. But one thing that's interesting is that's true for heavy grassroots supporters, but in some places it's also true just for everybody. Like when you get to a swing state, you can't. You and I know you can't call anyone in Iowa for the entire month of January because the phones are ringing off the hook from every candidate. And one thing we've talked about in the past here is that phone calls have become a huge new way that nonprofits are connecting one-on-one with donors because everybody's home, they want to talk, they want to go on walks together with cell phones. But that's going to shut off for a little while. So what are the states where we might be thinking, okay, we just can't call people for October and November?
Yeah, I would look at the states where you have overlapping races. And so I'm from North Carolina. I know a lot of people I've seen in the chat are also from North Carolina. So just as an example, North Carolina is going to be a target presidential race. In fact, the Republicans are hosting their convention there if they have a convention in person. Governor Cooper is up for re-election. Senator Tillis is up for re-election. There are competitive congressional districts. There are competitive state legislative districts. And by the way, it's a redistricting year. So whoever wins the majority in the state legislature in North Carolina this year will take in the data from the census that's happening right now and draw new congressional maps that will last for the next decade. And so even those races, which typically don't get as much attention, are getting a lot of time and focus and attention right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there are other states like that. I mean, Colorado is going to have a top tier Senate race, and other statewide that are important. And it's also going to be a presidential battleground. Maine, may not be as competitive in the presidential, though they divide up their electoral districts interestingly. So there will be a lot of attention on Maine too. But the Senate race there might be the most competitive in the country. Arizona, Georgia. Georgia, I think, is going to be a surprising focus for both the campaign, the presidential campaign, and for the folks tracking the Senate race this year. And so if you were thinking through your program and your outreach, I would really think about those places where you have lots of competitive races all happening concurrently. And just on the phone point, one of the things that's, I think, an important trend to recognize for campaigns is that, picking up the phone and talking to people is really, really important right now. But texting has actually become the thing, probably the most important outreach trend that campaigns are using today. And it's not the sort of blast text that, though that is important, it is the one-to-one peer-to-peer text messaging that many campaigns at every different level, from mayoral races all the way up to the presidential, are using to such powerful effect. And so it's another place where we're going to have to compete for people's attention when we're trying to reach our most important audiences.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, and text messages traditionally have almost 100% open rate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start to talk to your donors, and if you're calling them, especially, more and more donors will be giving you their cell phone instead of their landline. So when you can't get through on the phone, you can say, hey, do you want to just go on a walk and chill out a little bit? And you can text them to get that invite, because it may not come through on email or phone to the same degree.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's switch gears for a minute, because I thought this text point was really interesting. You have this front row seat to all the Democratic primary candidates, the Senate candidates, the congressional candidates. Even I'm sure you're in touch with the Biden campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone in this community is trying to figure out, okay, what do we do now? And everyone in campaigns is also thinking about that. And so what are some of the cool ideas that you're seeing come up as people are trying to navigate this and continue to fundraise, especially around major donors?
Yeah, I mean, the really incredible thing is that, everyone has become an online organizer now.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you and I started our sort of careers in this space, there was this open question about whether online organizing was even a thing, whether you could move people to do anything, just reaching out to them online. And today it is the primary mode of interaction and certainly persuasion, but also engagement and mobilization. And so what you are seeing is that campaigns are getting incredibly sophisticated about what channels people prefer. The text message point is I think, really, really essential. So I was catching up with a mentee who is the digital director for one of the really competitive Senate races last night. And she was saying, they had to cancel all of their in-person fundraising events. And so, they've had their candidates sit down and start doing these Zoom fundraisers that, are structured a lot like this conversation, where, people, buy a ticket, they join, they can ask questions of the candidate, they can have like this sort of genuine interaction. And so what, they started doing to make those as powerful and meaningful as they can is they started using peer-to-peer text messaging to make sure that everyone who received the invite gets another nudge. And what they've seen is, if they tell people, if in the interaction on text, they share a donate link and say, any contribution, we'll send you an invite to join the fundraiser. There are events or fundraisers that have actually produced more dollars from those text messaging outreaches than they have sourced directly to the fundraising landing page itself. So it's that ongoing sort of 360 approach that I think is so essential and so interesting. I think you've seen a lot of technical innovation, which is fascinating to me. One of the things that's true on the Democratic side is that most campaigns, almost universally now, use the same payment processing platform. It's called ActBlue. ActBlue has this beautiful feature that allows a donor to save their credit card information, and then, with one click, contribute to anybody who is using ActBlue as their platform. And so it's a great way for activists to, make their lives easy, and give to a lot of the causes and candidates that they support. And for as long as they've been in existence, they've operated by this like brutal efficiency principle.
Hmm.
And so nothing goes on their donate page that slows it down. Nothing goes on their donate page that might distract someone from actually fulfilling the contribution. But just 3 weeks ago, I think, they rolled out a feature to let people make a contribution alongside a streaming video embed, because they recognize that the way that people are collecting money, the way that they are building support for their campaigns is different today than it's ever been before. And so the fundraising platform has become like a module, or a place for people to extend their technical imaginations in a way that's new as well.
That's great. Tracy asked, how much does ActBlue raise in total? ActBlue's raised about $1 billion. And it actually started out, as Matt was saying, for political candidates. But now there's something called ActBlue C3 or ActBlue Charitable, something like that.
Yeah,
And
that's right. That's right. And it's a whole set of options, and for progressive nonprofits in particular. But it's really sort of extraordinary, that all of that infrastructure now exists for folks outside of the direct political space, and everyone is able to sort of benefit from the shared efficiencies that they have seen. And one of the really truly fascinating things that I think about ActBlue is that they are seeing that we had a really competitive Democratic primary, and rather than sort of creating any choice paralysis or donor fatigue, sort of like Patrick was saying in the upfront here, what they saw is that more interest and more engagement just boosted people's giving overall. And so they have broken their quarterly fundraising records, I think, every quarter since the presidential election kicked off. And just in the first quarter of 2020, January, February, March, they processed $533 million through the platform just in those first 3 months. So it's like wild. And, it's really extraordinary how moving someone into what they call the express lane pool, the people who've saved their credit information, just changes your ability to, reach out to them. It changes your ability to grow support for the movement as a whole. It's a really essential piece of infrastructure for progressives.
Yeah. This is a great point, and it's really helpful. I mean, just to sort of clarify for everybody, the charitable lens is now you can use it as a hospital, as a church, as a college. You don't have to have any political affiliation, and what's baked into it is more than 10 years of just rigorous experimentation and data-driven, the data-driven experiments that we love, and so I believe it's totally free. There's a sort of a tipping model for ActBlue, but you can host events that way at no cost. You can get them up really quickly. So it's a great advantage. And you're basically taking advantage of all of the smartest minds in fundraising for the last 12 years. And every time there's a little incremental benefit, it comes to you. So that's really, really cool. All right. We have only time for 1.5 more questions. So before we get to the last question, what are you seeing at some of these very small races? So some folks in this community are really the only fundraising person at their shop, and that may be true at a state legislative level, or maybe a not hyper competitive congressional level. Yep. What are the smallest organizations doing that you're seeing works really well?
I mean, I think they're changing their approach too, and it's really focused. Like successful operations that I've sort of talked to and sort of observed are really changing the interaction between the campaign as institution and the end supporter, the end voter. They're sort of recognizing that people are anxious and people are isolated and alone in a way that they've really never been, and they're making space for different kinds of conversations. And so if you've ever done field, if you've ever volunteered to knock doors for a campaign before, there's a really structured, process-driven way to do that. You literally use a script, and it's to make sure that you can move through as many of those conversations as you can, as efficiently as you can, and get the conversation or get the data that the campaign needs to be effective with as little time at the door as possible. And I just think that what we've seen is that is no longer sufficient. And so I've seen, I've talked to folks at state parties, and I've seen, some of these state legislative races actually do sort of proactive outreach just to check in and see how their community is. And I think, that's true for a lot of nonprofits today. So it's nice to see, but I think it's particularly important. I've seen a lot of empowering, volunteers to make sort of more space for more authentic conversations. And one of the other things that I think is really important, we're talking about fundraising today, but the end goal is actually votes on campaigns. And so because how we go about the process of voting in this election is kind of an open question in a lot of places. I've been really fascinated by the ways in which some committees, some state parties are training up people to help voters navigate that process. In Wisconsin, for instance, they had a really big Supreme Court race, state Supreme Court race last month. And the state party trained dozens of these navigators to have FaceTime calls with the voters they really needed to reach, and literally walk them through the process of requesting, filling out, and submitting their sort of formal request for an absentee ballot, and making sure that they had the sort of postage and the support they needed to get that ballot back to the Board of Elections. And so we can talk about technical stuff all day. We can talk about technological innovation and new tools and all of that. But I think that mind shift is actually the most essential innovation that I've seen so far in this election.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so we're basically out of time, but still, who do you think is going to be the vice presidential nominee? You're on the pulse more than anybody I know.
I think that if I were going to place money,
yeah,
there's a lot of sort of big names that people are sort of circling and that get referenced a lot in the speculative stories about this. And it could easily be one of those people. There's certainly virtue in picking someone who brings their own star power to the ticket. But if I were going to place a bet myself, I would bet the field. I would bet the folks who are not in that top tier and getting the best odds, because Joe Biden's done this job before. And so I think what he is going to prioritize is the person who can be the best partner for governing, because that was always what he set out to do for President Obama. And he's going to have really great conversations with a lot of people. They're going to run a really vigorous vetting process to make sure that they are choosing the right person. But when it comes down to it, I suspect he is going to go with the person who he feels is most ready to help lead the country going forward.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So Matt is going to stick around for some questions. Thank you so much. So get those in. I would tell you actually that I think this is not my bet, but my hope would be Michelle Obama. I think that she's actually had the front row seat and would be an incredibly charismatic leader. So no more politics, well, some more politics, but very tactically, we'll go back to this. So thank you so much. We'll see you back in maybe 10 minutes or so. Cool. Okay, give me one. Here we go. Great. So thank you so much, Matt. That was awesome. And I hope folks sort of have a couple of key takeaways there. Matt, feel free to mute yourself, go off video, go get some water, chill out. We'll see you back in 10 minutes or so. I wanted to walk through some strategies for folks who are thinking about what to do about to make the strategic decisions based on all the things we just learned from Matt and some of the other things that we're thinking about. Especially in a year like 2020, which we may have to totally redo this in 4 years. We do it again. The first idea here is that you want to rethink summer. So traditionally, most organizations have avoided summer events, except for a few folks that are throwing gatherings in the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard or something else like that. But vacations will actually be significantly down in 2020. And also, out of town doesn't matter. So even if folks are removed, they'll still be looking for things to do in the evening because they're not going to be going to restaurants or bars or other sort of big communities. And so this traditional pause in the calendar might not make sense. And so what you can think about is continuing to do fundraising and stewardship events at the same pace that you might do in the fall or spring. And this actually gives you a really big opportunity to help hit your goals if you can increase the frequency of some of those, because you don't have the same constraints that you've had traditionally. And so if you look at any nonprofit fundraising calendar, there's a giant hole in sort of the middle of June to the end of August. And actually that doesn't have to be the case, especially, as we're going to get to a second, if you have to think about being a little bit more cautious in fall. So as we talk about fall, you are going to have a really hard time breaking through to supporters, particularly in these months. And we really mean October and the first week of November. Phone calls, as you can imagine, are going to be much less frequent, but you start switching from just calling out of the blue to scheduling ahead of time. And in your phone calls with major donors in June, July, August, say, great, it may be hard breaking through to you if you live in Florida or you live in Ohio or you live in Wisconsin. How would you like me to get in touch to schedule this so that your phone's not ringing off the hook all the time? And that will be a way to build a bridge immediately that will get you through the last period. And then one thing I want to note, and Matt and I didn't get to talk about it, but the 2 weeks before November 3rd are obviously going to be the hardest. It's also possible in 2020 that the 2 weeks after November are going to be really challenging. And what I mean by that is if it's a mail-in election, you may not have a clear winner on the day after. Right? Some of you remember the 2000 election, where it took us a few days, but it could take us weeks to determine a presidential winner, which is a little bit bonkers to think about. But it's very logical if you think about the large movement towards mail-in ballots, the inability or the lack of expertise in counting those, and the number of swing states. It's likely that the election is going to be sort of relatively far apart at the national level, but close in a few states. And so just be ready for things hanging in the balance for 15 days in November, which is going to be really challenging as a country. But you do want to make sure that you're at least thinking about that as you're scheduling things. Sorry to bring that bad news to folks. The other thing to note, as we talked about earlier in the research, that if you're an advocacy organization or you have a political bent, or even if your members tend to be overwhelmingly liberal or conservative, you want to have two plans in place. And you want to make sure you have a plan for if your candidate wins or if your candidate loses, and recognize the difference in fundraisings. If you are a more liberal or progressive organization, in particular, I think your financial outcomes are going to vary wildly by winner. I think it will be a bigger impact up or down on progressive organizations versus conservative organizations, but we can pay attention to that going forward. All right, strategy 3 is one way to break through is to think about non-competitive giving types. So political campaigns, as you all know, only take cash gifts, with a few rare exceptions that aren't even worth talking about. But stock, qualified charitable distributions, bequests, etc., face almost no competition, because to give the same amount of money, you could give $60 to a candidate or $100 to a charity because of the tax treatment here. And then donor advised funds, which we'll talk about next week, actually face zero competition at all. You are 100% not allowed to give those to a political candidate or to an electioneering organization. And so this provides a really interesting opportunity on DAFs, but we'll talk about donor advised funds a bit more next week. When we think about how do you open the door to those more complex giving types, I wanted to sort of reshare a type of message that we talked about a few weeks ago, which is called the open door technique. So what you do is you share something about yourself. Hope all is well with you. My family's holding up okay. Here's a couple of ways that we're making do. This allows the donor to start getting in a more intimate, connected feel. I also wanted to share some of the things that we're doing as people are persevering, this idea that you're sort of continuing your work despite the pandemic, even if it's not directly related to it, is still a powerful message. And then you can see that not everyone is going to be able to give, but we know that the crisis is hitting everyone differently, and we hope you're doing okay. Some people have asked what to do to help, and here are some ways to help. So you've done this in response to things, and we talked about this when we went through surveys a few weeks ago, that surveys will actually give you permission to then continue marketing, which is a really, really powerful tactic. and then you want to provide some contact information. So this sort of method of, if you are open to help, here are some ways to do so, will then get donors in the mind um, of what possibilities might exist. You can also use a similar version of this email as a phone script to share, to get permission to then follow up as well. So this is really powerful. We've already seen some nonprofits put into effect, and those folks have reported really strong success with this model of email. Some have used the template almost exactly. So we have a resources page, and it's free for everybody there. And the last thing I want to note, and Matt and I hinted about this in the conversation, is that this is going to be the ugliest political campaign we've had in a long time. And it's just, I think nothing in my lifetime is going to mirror this. And I don't know, those of you who are older than I am maybe there was a Nixon campaign that got really rough, but it's not clear to me that anything's going to reach this level. When you look at sort of a political science background or standpoint, Trump's approval rating is just remarkably stable. It's sort of like solidly in the mid to low 40s. It's also low by historical standards, which makes the rational strategy for the Trump campaign is to try to push down Joe Biden's approval rating himself so that Joe Biden's at 38% or 40%, as opposed to building up Trump's, which is relatively stable and has been for almost 4 years. And so what that means is that the rational strategy for Trump is to just go sort of nuclear negative, and it's likely that Biden will do something similar in return. So what will happen is this is just going to be an exhausting, difficult, sad period for a lot of people. Anyone watching television is just going to get inundated with negative ads. Radio, the online ads are going to be, both the legitimate online ads are going to be sharply negative, and you can imagine the misinformation is going to be through the roof. So people are going to feel weary and tired and upset, similar almost the way that a lot of people were feeling in early April and late March. So when we talk to donors, they're really looking for a lot of sources of joy from you, and that will happen even more. That will be even more true in August, September, October, November. So start identifying sources of joy that you can share. We'll go through a couple of examples in a moment, but you want to start a plan now for October and November to say, we know there's a lot going on. Here's just a moment of respite. Save the Redwoods, which we shared weeks ago, sends a moment in the Redwoods. That's just a beautiful video of the Redwood forest with some background music. You could do a peaceful image or video of campus. You can do students telling stories about what they're doing remotely. You can do hospital workers, all these things that are moments of hope and inspiration. I just need to tell you, those are going to be really, really needed come the fall. It's going to be a rough, brutal period, and anything you guys can do will be incredibly well received by your donors, and frankly, it's going to be a really good thing for the country. You can consider things like fun and playful events, things like trivia nights, things like talent shows, things that are a little escapism are actually a really good moment to think about in September or October. So maybe put those on your calendar. We have a whole template of how to run a trivia night on our resources page, and you might want to take a look at that. And then the last thing is just doing thoughtful one-to-one things. So you might want to block out time in August, September to just write handwritten notes, and maybe a copy of a poem that makes you happy, or a recipe that brings you joy, or something else that is just sort of a one-to-one reminder that it's just a bunch of humans connecting with each other in what will be a cacophonous time. Okay, so that's mostly it on fundraising in the political world, or in a political season, but I wanted to share a couple of ideas we've seen from around the country, a lot submitted by folks on this call. So a huge thank you here. One organization is sending bottles of wine to top donors and then having happy hours as a way to have great connection. I love this from St. James School. So they conducted interviews via Zoom with a broad cross-section of alumni and are splicing the videos highlighting the various reasons they support St. James School. One idea here is that if you have a donor you want to more deeply involve, interview them, get them on camera talking about how great the school is, and that will bring them much more close to the organization. This is another youth music organization. We're trying to use our best resource, the musicians, so we email 1 or 2 performances as an attachment. And this is really cool for the folks that are supporting it. And that one-to-one, being able to really see someone performing is going to bring those donors much closer to the organization, and you'll see, my guess is, a dramatic increase in giving here. Also, personalizing calls with donors. So instead of just having a phone call, say, hey, can we have tea together? Can we go on a walk? Make it a little bit more of a special event that creates a more memorable lasting. The more newness something has, the more it will sink in as a memory, as opposed to sort of blend into all the phone calls. This is for your organization. And coming back to the level of anxiety that we're seeing increasing, Jenny and I looked up and realized that not only were our team members not really taking vacation, they also stopped getting sick because they were just doing a lot less. And so people haven't missed days of work in months. And so what we did is we created summer free days, which is just one additional day off each month, almost as if it was an additional holiday. And just saying, great, we're shutting the office, the virtual office. Everybody has to log off, go hiking, go be with your family, go walk your dog, go read a book, but really pushing a little bit more mental health, because the role that vacation plays is important in reducing anxiety and building happiness. And that's just missing for a lot of organizations. So feel free to pitch this to your boss or manager. They probably need a mental health day as well. A couple more ideas. In addition to all the institutional outreach, we have started to connect with alumni through virtual roundtable events and are excited to see how they go. This is a really great opportunity. Interviews, frankly, take less work than doing a full-blown preparation and bring in a lot of cool perspectives. It's also the case that you can bet that those alumni who are invited to the virtual roundtable are now much closer to the institution. So that's a really big opportunity. If you have a major donor, especially as a college or something with an alumni base, and you want to bring them closer, think about putting them on a panel with 3 or 4 other people and sharing, okay, how are different businesses navigating this crisis or something similar. Wounded Warriors Foundation, this is really interesting. The sub-headline that you can see, companies and foundations being asked to match funds, is a really cool idea. And so if you can start doing something PPP related or similar that's COVID related, you can actually go out and ask for matching funds. This will also bring in new donors who are then potentially stewarded to long-term general operational givers as well. So a really big opportunity there. Just a couple of final ones that I really love from the Gates Park Conservancy. So the key thing here is this top part. They give free Zoom backgrounds to take to your meetings. And so if you are a museum, an orchestra, a land trust, a school, a college, these are a great opportunity where having a high-res photo of this campus or whatever might be cool will really bring people back. And when someone says, oh, tell me more about your Zoom background, they will say, oh, great, this is the Parks Conservancy, and we'll be able to share it. So it's an actually really interesting moment to create some viral conversation pieces that you wouldn't normally have access to do. So hats off to Golden Gate for that. The other thing they did is they just made some more, this sort of bottom part here, Golden Gates Park trivia, pretty easy to do, really fun, helps people learn more about the parks and get closer to that organization. So if someone downloads a trivia pack, they're a great person to call up in a week and say, how was trivia? Did you do it? What did you like? Would you be interested in supporting the parks going forward? And it's a way to prospect for new donors in a really interesting way. One more idea that I really love and wanted to share is there's a class called The Science of Well-Being that a couple of folks at FreeWill are taking. It's from Yale. It's the most popular class at Yale. It's now free and online. It's not academically challenging, but it basically talks people about through happiness habits that will reduce anxiety and create more joy in this time. So if you want to check it out, not related to fundraising, probably will make your life a lot better. Just Google The Science of Well-Being, and it's on a site called Coursera, which is a site that hosts online classes. So check that out. If you take it, let me know how the experience is. Really love it. It's totally free, by the way, in case that wasn't clear. All right, so wrapping up before we get to questions, there's a whole bunch of resources available to you, and we keep updating them. So emails for the crisis, phone scripts, some case studies of what other organizations are doing. Those are all there for you if you need them. We are holding another of these higher ed demonstrations, basically walk through planned major giving tools for higher ed. And so that we keep adding them on for another week each time, and tons of people have already signed up. So if you want to, It's tomorrow at 1 p.m. Feel free to join that as well. And then last resource before we get to Q&A is the quests, as you guys know, are continuing to be off the charts. And so if you are not a FreeWill partner, but you want to see whether people have donated to your organization so you can steward those donors through our site, just shoot us an email, or actually there's a form that we'll send out with the recording, and you can sign up and we'll just sort of run that for you. And hopefully that will be really helpful and maybe secure some new donors as well. All right, let's do questions. There's a Q&A section which is different than the chat, so make sure to enter things there. And please, please, please fill out the survey, which just helps us sort of understand how things are going, what you'd like more of and what you'd like less. So let's get to questions. Only a few minutes. Alfred asks, on giving data in elections, are nonprofit PACs included in the data? And the answer is no. These are all 501c3 organizations. Marin asks, do we need to think differently about our highest capacity donors who are involved with super PACs and campaign bundling? I think that's actually a time to engage those extra. One of the things about things like campaign bundling is that those people have access to lots of other donors. And so you might want to think about how can you leverage something similar and say, we're doing this special thing. Do you have other friends you'd want to invite? And you can have an initial conversation over Zoom or whatever else. If they're a super PAC and pro-environment and you run a land trust or conservation organization, say, great, we're going to have this event. Feel free to invite any other friends. And then you can follow up one-on-one with those folks as potential donors as well. Maybe Matt, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but Jennifer asks, can politicians still donate unused campaign funds to charities? And what are the rules around that? Do you have any idea? I don't. And we may have to go look up the answer.
Yeah, the rules are complicated. I think that there is like a specific FEC opinion about it, but I don't know what the answer is. FEC is the Federal Elections Commission. I don't know what the answer is off the top of my head. I know that it is incredibly difficult for, it has been incredibly difficult in the past for campaigns to raise for nonprofits unless they are asking their supporters to make contributions directly to the nonprofits. So that's like another hurdle to navigate.
Matt is sharing the joys of parenting at home. As I'm sure that the folks that unmute, at least 10% have children yelling in the background too.
So it is nap time right now, and he is disagreeing with that. So
totally fair. Maybe let's close with this last question. And Matt, I'd love your take on this as well. Given the fall's calendar challenges, is it recommended to consider moving end of year appeals from November, December to maybe say October and December, or how is this going to affect end of year? And I should note that Matt's brother runs annual giving at NC State. And so he's thinking about this all the time. And I'm sure that you're giving your brother advice on this stuff all the time.
That's right. That's right. I honestly think that one of the things that you should do is make an assessment of your specific universe of donors. When we are helping clients solve this challenge at Blue State, one of the things we often do is take a look at the available data from the FEC. And we can use some of our data processing capabilities to actually match our client supporters against the FEC records, and then we can have a sense for how many people in a given nonprofit's universe are actively giving and participating in the sort of fundraising work of campaigns, and make more personalized, more sort of direct decisions that way. And so I don't know that I would make a blanket recommendation. If there is if your community doesn't have a lot of overlap with donors that who are supporting campaigns, or if the election does get decided more quickly because conditions on the ground are such that we know right away who the winner is, then we have more freedom. And Patrick, how would you answer that?
I think I would I would stick to the plan, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. It's obviously hard to do end of year fundraising in September, and you might want to you basically want a plan A and a plan B. So you've got your calendar ready to go, and then you call the mail house on November 10th if things are totally unresolved and say we're going to push things back a week. But also I think, in an indefinite fatigue period, people are going to be willing to think about their time at Ohio State, or the hospital they support, or their community garden, and things that are really looking for connection.
And this pandemic that we're all living in might be the other external event.
Right.
If there are another wave of outbreaks, then that's another thing to consider too.
Right. And who knows what else could happen? Like 2020 hasn't been our chillest year yet, so that could be great. All right, so Matt, thank you so much. By the way, Matt is at a great organization called Blue State, which we've talked about a little bit, but is really one of the leading experts in nonprofit fundraising in the country. And they've taken, a lot of the folks there used to work for Obama, and so they've taken all the best practices there. So folks can check out Blue State if they want to learn more about that. And then just a huge thank you to everybody who's joining, and not just joining, but contributing, sending all these great ideas in. It's really lovely to share it. So we will see you next week. We'll talk more about donor advised funds, which are their own special wild beast, and looking forward to learning more together.
Thank you all.
And thanks to everybody.